Our film kicks off with the psychiatrist, Dr. Mark, driving down the street when he suddenly stops for a young man lying on the ground, looking to be in terrible shape. We learn his name is Jeremy. Mark introduces himself as a psychiatrist and the owner of the healing towers. He pulls money from his pocket, gives it to Jeremy, and promises him that at the tower, he'll find a room with a bed, a bathroom, and a shower, a dignified life instead of this tragic existence on the streets.
Although Jeremy is anxious at first and doesn't understand, the offer is too tempting to refuse, and he agrees to go with Mark. When Jeremy arrives at the tower, he's completely stunned by the room he'll be staying in and the beautiful view from his window. The biggest surprise? He finds his favorite brand of chocolate on his nightstand. He asks Mark, astonished, "How did you know I liked this kind?"
Mark replies with a mysterious smile, saying he knows a lot about him, even more than Jeremy knows about himself. He tells him all the clothes in the room are his, and points to a book he authored, asking him to find time to read it, as he likes his patients to read his work. As soon as Mark leaves, Jeremy grabs the chocolate and devours it.
A little later, Jeremy, now showered and in clean clothes, meets with Mark. Mark introduces him to the others in the tower: the nurse, Grace, the guard, Richard, and another patient named Ashley. Ashley speaks up, telling Jeremy she's felt so much better since she arrived and hopes he finds peace too. But Jeremy is shocked to learn they don't serve any meat. Ashley tells him she was just as shocked at first, but Dr. Mark helped her stop eating meat, along with Grace's efforts. Grace beams and thanks her.
The next day, we see Jeremy collapsing in agony. He's an addict in desperate need of a fix. Dr. Mark speaks to him through the room's speakers, telling him to hold on and be strong. At that moment, Nurse Grace enters and gives him his medication, asking him to listen to Dr. Mark so he can get better and recover.
Jeremy clutches his head in pain. Mark speaks to him again, asking what's bothering him the most. Jeremy replies that he's haunted by his mother, Rhonda, and her pink glasses. He recounts how she constantly screamed at him, blaming him for his father leaving. It got so bad, she would beat him until he bled, telling him every day she wished he would die. That night, we find Jeremy in a healing room. Nurse Grace comes in to give him his medication, as it's time. She first gives him a piece of his favorite chocolate, telling him he'll get one every day if he behaves and takes his medicine. She then gives him an injection. A short time later, Jeremy wakes up to the voice of Dr. Mark. He discovers the room is filled with hidden speakers and cameras. Mark asks him if he smells roses. This triggers a memory for Jeremy, the red roses his mother's boyfriend, John, used to bring her. He remembers the time John broke his arm, hit him, and then gave his mother roses. Mark tells him to focus on the smell of the red roses to free himself from the bad memories associated with them. The next day, we see a cop named Joe arguing with his boss, Ron. Joe stole evidence from a criminal and beat him up. Joe insists the criminal knows where his missing daughter Casey is. Ron tells him they aren't ignoring the case and are actively searching for Casey, but Joe needs to be patient and act rationally. He orders him to take time off. Joe surrenders his weapon, telling Ron he can't rest until he finds his daughter. Elsewhere, a young woman named Darlene is watching a video of Dr. Mark with a former patient, Amanda. Amanda talks about how Mark changed her life and how happy she was at his treatment tower. However, she admits she doesn't remember anything about the dream therapy she underwent. She asks Mark if the therapy is designed to make patients forget. Mark confirms this, explaining that the foundation of his therapy is forgetting the trauma, so it's natural for the patient to have no memory of it. Next, we see Darlene going to Dr. Mark and volunteering to be part of his therapy. She signs an NDA, and he informs her that anything she sees is strictly confidential to protect patient privacy. Mark then hands her a pair of pink glasses and tells her to put them on. He explains that she will be helping them treat Jeremy by playing the role of his mother, Rhonda.
We then see Darlene in the room with Jeremy. Dr. Mark speaks through the intercom, telling Jeremy his mother is there to see him. Jeremy becomes extremely agitated. Mark tries to calm him, telling him he's not a child anymore and must tell his mother not to hurt him again. Jeremy breaks down, screaming at Darlene as Rhonda that she's a monster who ruined his life, that he hates her, and he never wants to see her again. Mark's voice coaxes him, reminding him he's currently in a dream and can do anything he wants to his mother.
At this, Jeremy decides to attack Darlene, believing she is his mother. He beats her violently. Darlene screams in pain and shock, especially when Mark tells Jeremy he'll find a knife in the drawer to do what he's always wanted to do. Jeremy chases Darlene as she tries to escape. He catches her, and she tries to tell him she's not his mother and Dr. Mark is lying. But Mark keeps talking to Jeremy, promising him he'll be cured once he lets it all out and gets his revenge. Jeremy then stabs Darlene in the head with the knife and even cuts off her ear. Darlene tries to flee, but the door is locked.
The next day, Jeremy wakes up to find Mark waiting for him. Mark asks if he remembers anything from his dream. Jeremy says he still remembers the belt belonging to John, his mother's boyfriend, who used to beat him with it. Meanwhile, Darlene's friend, Julia, posts on social media that Darlene is missing and she can't reach her. At the same time, Joe is in a downward spiral, grieving for his daughter Casey and imagining she's still with him. He gets a call from Julia, who reminds him that she interviewed him a year ago about his daughter's disappearance and asks if they can talk. Back at Mark's healing tower, we see the guard, Richard, dragging an unconscious girl across the floor. The girl suddenly wakes up, terrified. Richard coldly tells her she shouldn't have thought about escaping again because she's not leaving until Mark cures her and allows it. Then, in a horrific and brutal act, Richard gouges out the girl's eyes and puts them in a jar. At the same time, Julia is with Joe, showing him a file with photos and info on people who have vanished suddenly, including Darlene and Casey. She tells him she feels their disappearances are connected. Joe goes to Darlene's apartment, where Julia lets him into a room. He sees the book Darlene was constantly reading. It's Dr. Mark's book. Joe is stunned by the coincidence. Casey was also a huge fan of Dr. Mark, read the same book, and believed his talk about dream therapy changing psychiatry forever. Joe decides then and there to investigate Mark and his healing towers. We then see Darlene waking up to Nurse Grace at her bedside. Darlene begs her to save her and help her. Suddenly, Dr. Mark enters and tells Darlene she was excellent. Darlene explodes in anger, calling him a crazy con artist who tricked her. She says he never explained the therapy would be this barbaric or that she would be physically harmed. Darlene starts screaming, but Mark just laughs at her, knowing no one can hear. Later, Mark and Grace go to Ashley's room. He gives Ashley her medication and asks her to remember a dark, sad memory. Ashley immediately flashes to Father Bob, the priest who sexually assaulted her every day at church. He had convinced her parents she was sick and possessed, needing prayer. When she tried to tell her family what was happening, no one believed her. Everyone called her a liar, especially her older sister, who constantly told her she was ruining their family's social standing. Next, we see Ashley in the healing room. Mark has brought in a new volunteer to play the role of the priest, so she can see him in her dream and get her revenge. Of course, none of the volunteers know exactly what's about to happen to them. Mark straps the volunteer to a chair and handcuffs him. When the man looks nervous, Mark assures him it's for his protection. Mark and Grace then leave the room.
As soon as the drug kicks in, Mark speaks to Ashley through the intercom, telling her Father Bob is right in front of her. She's in a dream and is allowed to get her revenge in any way she wishes. The volunteer starts to panic, especially as Ashley glares at him, telling him how much she despises him. Mark then tells Ashley there's something under the bed she'll need. Ashley finds an axe. She grabs it and decides her revenge on Bob will be to cut off the hands that violated her. She then brutally hacks off the volunteer's hand.
The next day, Julia goes to Joe's house where she sees a picture of Casey with her mother, Jenny. Joe tells her Jenny died when Casey was 5. He explains how much they suffered and how he tried to hide his grief from Casey so she wouldn't be more affected or see him as weak.
At that moment, Joe breaks down and cries. Julia holds him, comforting him.
Later, Julia is at home and opens Darlene's laptop. She finds the interview with Dr. Mark that Darlene had been watching. She also finds the address for the Healing Towers. She immediately calls Joe, tells him what she found, and says she has a feeling she might find Darlene there, or that Darlene at least met with Dr. Mark. Julia then goes to the Healing Towers.
Mark speaks to her through the intercom at the door, asking the reason for her visit. She explains she's looking for her friend Darlene, who might have come here, and that she needs help from anyone who might have seen her, as she's missing. Mark opens the door and tells Julia to come up to his office on the 6th floor.
When Julia reaches Mark's office, she explains that Darlene is a huge fan of his, studies mental health, follows his work, and loves his ideas. That's why Julia thought she might find Darlene here, perhaps learning from him. Mark claims he's never heard the name. He asks if she's notified the police. Julia says she hasn't yet because she expected Darlene to come back the next day, but now it's been 3 days.
Mark then asks a strange question. Did you tell anyone you were coming here? Julia is unsettled by the question but tells him she didn't expect him to actually meet with her. Mark then tells her about his own parents and how they suffered from mental illness and how barbaric the treatment methods were back then. He suggests he take her to look through the volunteer logs. Maybe Darlene signed up as one of them. Julia agrees.
We then see Mark taking Julia to Richard, explaining that Julia is looking for her friend Darlene. He leaves Julia alone with Richard and walks away. Richard then shows Julia an earring. Julia is horrified. It's Darlene's. She asks Richard if he's seen Darlene. In response, Richard shows her Darlene's severed ear, which he keeps in a jar. Julia is beyond horrified, realizing what's happened to Darlene. She shoves Richard and runs. She reaches a room and finds Darlene lying on a bed, handcuffed. She tries to save her, but Darlene is completely broken. At that exact moment, Mark's voice comes over the speakers, informing them they will remain in the tower and will not be leaving. He locks the door, trapping them inside. That night, as Mark sleeps, he dreams of his childhood, being in a hospital, watching his mother undergo electroshock therapy. He remembers walking in and deciding to kill one of the doctors with a syringe. Mark wakes up.
The next day, we see Julia tied to a chair in Mark's office. He forces her to watch his dream therapy on the security monitors. In the healing room, Darlene and Ashley are together. Nurse Grace injects Ashley with the drug and then sprays Darlene with the specific perfume worn by Ashley's sister. The plan is that when Ashley wakes up, she'll smell the perfume, believe Darlene is her sister, and take her revenge, thus freeing herself. Ashley wakes up. Mark speaks to her, telling her that her sister is sitting right in front of her, referring to Darlene. Ashley stares at Darlene with pure hatred and rage. When she smells the perfume, she snaps, grabbing Darlene's hair violently. Mark urges Ashley to take her revenge and get justice. But Darlene shoves Ashley away with her feet, trying to fight back and defend herself. Just then, Ashley finds the axe under the bed. She grabs it, attacks Darlene, and brutally murders her, fully believing she is killing her sister. During this, Julia is hysterical, crying and screaming at Mark that he's insane and sick. Mark calmly replies that he is a healer, bringing peace to troubled minds. Julia asks him how he can possibly see this as successful therapy. Mark tells her he was cured by this very therapy long ago. He remembers being a teenager and getting revenge on the doctor who was treating his mother, killing him with electricity, just as the doctor had tortured his mother. At this time, Joe goes to Julia's house. He's been calling her with no answer and is worried. When he finds her apartment empty, he panics. He sees her laptop and notices the Mark interview is still open. He remembers their conversation and realizes she must have gone to see Dr. Mark. Back at the tower, it's Jeremy's session. Nurse Grace enters with his medication, and with her is the same volunteer who played the priest for Ashley. This time, he's here to play the role of John, Jeremy's stepfather. Mark speaks to Jeremy, telling him John is in front of him, and he has permission to get his revenge however he wants. The volunteer desperately pleads with Jeremy, swearing he isn't John, that he's just a volunteer, but Jeremy doesn't believe him. He believes Mark. He begins to beat the man violently. He grabs a belt, wraps it around the volunteer's neck, and strangles him with pure rage and hatred until he's dead. Jeremy then begins to laugh hysterically. Julia is forced to watch all of this on the monitor. She tells Mark he's a psychopath and a murderer. Mark replies that his therapy liberates people from their trauma, allowing them to leave and start new lives as leaders in their fields. He claims that through his therapy, he discovered that the mentally ill are geniuses. Joe calls his boss, Ron, to tell him Julia has now disappeared, just like her friend and his daughter. Ron tells him to meet at the station in half an hour. Later, we see Julia locked inside a cage. Jeremy happens to see her. Julia begs him to help her, but Jeremy is terrified, saying he left his room without Dr. Mark's permission and will be punished if caught. Julia tries to reassure him that no one will punish him while she's with him. Jeremy then asks her, "Will you get me the chocolate I like?" She promises to get him anything he wants if he frees her. Jeremy goes to get the key, opens the cage, and frees Julia from her handcuffs. But he's too afraid to escape with her, telling her he's not cured yet and still needs the treatment. Julia tells him Dr. Mark is lying to him to keep him here, and she promises if he escapes with her, she'll get him all the chocolate he wants. At that exact moment, Mark stirs in his sleep and sees Jeremy and Julia escaping on the security monitors. He leaps up and races to the tower with Richard. They catch Julia just as she's calling 911, and they recapture both her and Jeremy. Back at the station, Joe and Ron are listening to the 911 call Julia made. It was too short, and they couldn't trace the location. Joe tells them the call must be from Dr. Mark's healing tower, and he's not waiting for the police to act. We next see Joe trying to sneak into Mark's tower. He finds Richard holding the severed head of a young woman. Joe draws his gun, telling him to raise his hands. He asks his name. Richard replies that he's the security guard and claims the head is normal to have as it's a medical facility and they have human body parts for experiments. Joe doesn't buy it. Richard gets angry, telling Joe he's trespassing without a warrant and they can sue him. Then Joe freezes. On the table, he sees his daughter Casey's necklace. He asks Richard where he got it. Richard lies, saying he won it in a bet. Joe punches him, demanding to know where his daughter is. When Joe opens a nearby refrigerator, he finds it full of human body parts. Richard tries to lie again, claiming they're for Halloween.
But just then, Mark appears with a gun, threatening Joe and forcing him to drop his weapon. Joe complies. Richard immediately attacks Joe, beating him. He and Mark drag Joe to the same cage where Julia is and lock them in together. Joe threatens them, saying the police are on their way, but Mark is completely unfazed. Mark and Richard go to Nurse Grace, telling her the police might know Joe is there. Grace gets upset as new patients are scheduled to arrive next week. Mark orders her and Richard to hide all evidence of Joe and Julia's presence, so they'll be in the clear if the police show up. Grace asks what to do about Jeremy and Ashley, since their treatment isn't finished. Mark tells her they can't be allowed to leave, and the only solution is to get rid of them. Grace is stunned by his request. She goes to Jeremy's room with a syringe to end his life. Jeremy is hysterical, understanding exactly what she's about to do. But at the last second, Grace can't go through with it. She backs down. Meanwhile, Richard and Mark are at the cage to take Joe and Julia and execute them. But Julia manages to attack Mark, and Joe attacks Richard, knocking him unconscious. They tie Mark up and escape. Joe calls Ron, telling him to get to the tower with backup immediately. Grace hears Mark's voice and runs to help him. He runs off to manage the situation. Grace tries to wake Richard up, but Joe and Julia suddenly enter. In that instant, Joe gets the shock of his life. Grace is his daughter, Casey. Richard had lied to him when he said Casey was dead and that he had taken her eyes. We then learn that Mark called one of his powerful, high-influence contacts to help him flee the country. Later, at the police station, Ron and Joe are interrogating Grace. They're trying to find out what Mark did to her, but she's adamant that her name is Grace, not Casey, and that Mark is a kind man who helps patients. Left with no choice, Ron shows her the security footage, showing Mark brainwashing her, and also showing him sexually assaulting her while she was under the influence of the drugs.
She is horrified. She breaks down and begins to have seizures. Joe panics, terrified for her. The next day, we see Joe at the hospital with his daughter. The moment she wakes up, she remembers everything. She remembers she is Casey and that Joe is her father. She cries as she hugs him, telling him how much she missed him. Joe reassures her that he's by her side and will protect her from everything. And that's where the film ends.